Well, let's get started. As people filter in, let's give them a virtual welcome. Today, we're here to have a conversation for our networking event on self-awareness. And this really builds up quite nicely to the conversation that we're going to get to have with Dr. Tasha Eurich next week. I do want to say hi. My name is Meagan Pollock. And I am not showing my camera today, which might be the first one teaching, but I had I had oral surgery this morning. So my face is very swollen. And so you'll have to allow me some grace today as I'm also talking for the first time today without a mouthful of gauze and all of that jazz. So thank you for your kindness and grace. All right, well, so let's dive in today to the conversation. And I want to start us with a poll, thinking about on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm going to have a Slido poll here to pop up for you to do that. I want you to think about how self-aware do you think you are? And I want you to think about it across the dimensions of your relationships, communication, expertise, your open-mindedness, your kindness, your health, your feedback and leadership, across lots of different dimensions. How self-aware do you think you are? Now, what I've got here on the screen is a Slido poll. So you can either go to slido.com and then enter in the numbers 565-375, or you can open up the camera app on a smartphone and hover it over the QR code. It'll pop up a little bubble, open that into your browser, and this will be the same QR code that we'll use throughout the day. And it shows me in the top right how many people are logged into it. And the way I have this poll set up is to give some people a chance to respond, and then I'll click and it will show us a distribution. So far, six people have participated so far. 11 people are logged in. So let's give you a few more minutes because that's not even half of us. Looks like we might be getting close to half now, 13. Give a few more people a chance. Think about how self-aware do you think you are? You don't see the QR code. Let's see. Here, if you go to slido.com and then type in the number 565-375.
Well, it tells me that there's no such event active right now on Slido.
I just did it and it's working.
Never mind. It's operator error. I'm sorry.
All right, so we got 20 people who participated. I'm going to give you a couple of more seconds to give it a shot, and then we're going to move forward here. If you don't get a chance to participate on this one, we'll have more here in just a little bit. So I'm going to click here, and it's going to show us a distribution. So it looks like most of us feel that we're about a 7, 6, 7, 8 out of 10. Self-aware. So nobody thinks, oh, somebody thinks that they're like 100% self-aware. All right. And so we've got a pretty even distribution and concentration around the 6, 7, 8. All right. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward in the conversation. Now, self-awareness, what is it? Self-awareness is conscious knowledge of our character, our feelings, our motives, and our desires. Now, think about for a second, what do you think are the benefits of being self-aware? Why do we need to be self-aware? What good does it do us? So this is the same QR code. So if you still have the browser page open on your phone or on your computer, it will just refresh. If you have trouble with the QR code and the Slido, you're welcome to put your comments into the chat. But if you put them on the screen, then they'll be documented for the recording. So benefits of being self-aware, it helps us to see areas that may need to change, knowing our faults so that we can work on self-improvement, better relationships, to be able to interact with others more openly and honestly, to be resourceful. It helps develop nurturing relationships. Being self-aware could help us in a relationship with a friend or a coworker. What else? Some ideas in the chat say the more self-aware that one is, the happier they can be in their lives. Okay. Also in the chat, you can better adjust to different people and situations as they change. More comments on the Slido say, know your triggers, avoid the wrong reactions. You can see what to sustain the good parts and improve, and rather than the not so good ones. Good. All right, so we've got about 12 people participating on the poll, but keep these ideas in mind, and I'm gonna move us forward to look at what some of the literature says. And this comes directly from Dr. Tasha Eurich's article from the Harvard Business Review, what self-awareness really is and how to cultivate it. And so she found in her research that we are more confident and more creative when we see ourselves clearly, that we make sounder, better decisions, that we build stronger relationships and communicate more effectively. This last one to me really stands out because when we think about how do we create equitable and inclusive work environments, we need to have strong relationships and we need to be culturally responsive in our communication. And we need to be able to communicate in a way that enhances our relationships. So again, self-awareness is really critical here. Also, what they found is that we're less likely to lie, cheat, and steal, that we are better workers who get more promotions, and they found that we're more effective leaders with more satisfied employees and more profitable companies. So these are all good things, right? And in addition to some of the things that you all added in the chat and on the Slido, when we see ourselves clearly, it opens up lots of opportunities for us to grow. What else would you add to this list that maybe we haven't already captured? All right, so I know that maybe you haven't had a chance to read Tasha's book yet, but Insight is one of my favorite books, and I have read it multiple times. I keep thinking the more I read it, maybe the more self-aware I'll become. I read it about once a year, and so I was incredibly thrilled when Allison told me that you all were bringing Dr. Eurich in and for the event next week. And so I have already taught this stuff. So it's exciting to get to bring her work to you in this kind of way. And so what her work has found is there's these 3 key points that we're going to sort of anchor our conversation on today. So one is that there are 2 types of self-awareness. The next thing that we'll talk about is how experience and power can hinder our self-awareness. And then the third is that introspection doesn't always improve self-awareness. And how she came about this is that her team of researchers created a large-scale scientific study on self-awareness. So they had 10 separate investigations and nearly 5,000 participants. They examined what self-awareness really is and why we need it and how we can increase it. And so their research, as we'll get to know reading her content and chatting with her next week, it's revealed lots of roadblocks and myths and truths about what self-awareness is and what it takes to improve it. And so I'll lead with this quote from her paper. She says that even though most of us believe that we're self-aware, and a lot of us did based on that poll, right? Only 10 to 15% of the people that they studied actually fit the criteria. So just like let that settle in for a second. Maybe we aren't as self-aware as we think we are. One of the previous subtitles for this book, I think she's changed it, is like why we're not as self-aware as we think we are, and what we need to do to change it. For whatever reason, I think she's changed it to a different subtitle now, but so we're not as self-aware as we think we are. Maybe we're all in that 10 to 15% are, but odds are we aren't, okay? So the two types of self-awareness that she talks about in the article are internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. So let me ask another question is, what is the difference between internal and external self-awareness, and why are they both important? So what do you think the difference is? So you're welcome to turn your mic on and share. You're welcome to contribute on the Slido, whatever way works best for you. What do you think? So how I perceive myself in contrast to how others perceive me. Perhaps one is about honesty with ourselves versus honesty with others. How you interact with yourself versus how you interact with others. Internal awareness is knowing how you work and feel and why. External is how you treat and interact. Okay. Somebody says, I see internal as being more introspective. External, yeah, so I'll give you the definitions here in a second. All right. So you're getting those neurons firing. That's great. So let's look at the definitions now. Ooh, somebody's been doing some internal family systems therapy. Somebody's talking about paying attention to your inner child. Good. Okay, so let's look at the definitions. So internal self-awareness, it represents how clearly we see our own values, our passions, our aspirations, our fit within our environment, our reactions, which are our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, our strengths and our weaknesses, and our impact on others. So she found, they found in their research that internal self-awareness is associated with higher job and relationship satisfaction, personal and social control, and happiness. And they found that it is negatively related to anxiety, stress, and depression. So the more internally self-aware that we are, the happier that we are going to be, and the less likely we're going to be anxious, stressed, or depressed. That sounds good, right? So we want to be more self-aware. Now, external self-awareness, that means understanding how others view us in terms of those same factors that we listed on the previous slide. So you know that old saying, like, perception is reality. Like, that's what this is. Perception is reality, of like how people see you is the sort of truth of the awareness that we need to garner. So they found in their research that people who know how others see them, they are more skilled at showing empathy and taking others' perspectives. And they also found that for leaders who see themselves as their employees do, their employees tend to have a better relationship with them. They feel more satisfied, and they see them in general as more effective. What are your thoughts on the differences between internal and external? How does that compare with what you thought they were? So let's begin to map this out. So I've got another poll for you. This is a multiple choice. I want you to select which one of the following best describes you. The first one says, I'm more introspective, clear on who I am, but don't often challenge my views or seek feedback from others. The second one says, I'm aware, I know who I am, what I want to accomplish, and intentionally seek out and value others' opinions. Third says, I find myself seeking a lot. I'm not so sure who I really am, what I stand for, or how others see me. And the fourth is, now pick the truth, right? Like, not that your ideal one. Pick what you think like really is the most truth about you. And again, I don't know who's saying what. So this is, nobody's going to know what you're selecting. So far, 9 people have participated. Let's give a little bit more space for others to contribute. And remember, we can't all be the aware ones, right? Only 10 to 15% of us really are. So if all of us pick that one, what does that say about us? And again, I'm just kidding. I would probably pick the second one, but I know I'm learning to always be aware. But you can find yourself in all of the others as probably as well. A few more seconds to contribute. So Tanya, it says in the chat, aren't we always evolving and growing? Well, I would hope so, Tanya. Yes, I hope so. And Laura says, I've been all of them. I agree. I think I see myself in all of these. So let's see what you all, said. So we had a pretty, half of us said that we're more introspective, clear in who we are, but don't often challenge our views or seek feedback. Thank you for that honesty. About 40% noted that you feel aware and you're confident and intentional about feedback. And then a few of us find ourselves seeking or find ourselves being people pleasers. I don't know, y'all. I grew up in the South and I know a lot of people pleasers. At least in my family, there were. I don't know if that's a Southern thing, but there seems to be a concentration in my family. All right.
I think sometimes that being a people pleaser is how we see what it takes to get ahead, you know, like for thinking professionally, you know, that we have to, you know, kind of set our own wants aside sometimes to make other people happy.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. What are some other thoughts? Do you find yourself having different sort of levels of self-awareness, both internal and external, in different environments? Maybe at your work community, you have a certain level of self-awareness, internal and external, but yet in your hobbies, or if you have a church or whatever kind of community where you spend time with people outside of a professional setting, maybe you have a different kind of self-awareness. Think about why that is. Why do you think we do that?
Well, I think sometimes in some groups, it's probably a little bit more rooted in as a defense mechanism. Like with certain groups of people and in certain environments, you're probably a lot more willing to be, you know, a little bit more kind of loose with maybe some things that you say or the ways that you interact with people. And so sometimes I think with how we're interacting with people in those groups, you're kind of willing to, I guess, show different parts of yourself, and they don't always come together in the best way.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. What I hear you saying and what you just described is you're talking about authenticity. And authenticity is a function of our belonging. If we feel safe in a space, to varying degrees, to the degree to which we feel like we belong, we're able to be more authentic. You know, as a defense mechanism, kind of what Kirk was talking around, you know, well, he was saying more of a strategy for getting ahead, but it can also be a survival tactic, is that sometimes we can take on some, maybe we're hyper aware of who we are in a space if we are from a marginalized or minoritized population, right? Like that affects how we're going to engage in a space. Well, so let's look at each of these and how she, Dr. Tasha Eurich, mapped them out. So she calls them the 4 self-awareness archetypes. And so she has a 2x2 map of these, and they map the internal self-awareness. So that's how well we know ourselves, against the external self-awareness. And that's how well we understand how others see us. So the first one in the top left, these are the introspectors. It means that you have a high internal self-awareness, but a low external self-awareness. So people who are introspectors, it can harm relationships and limit your success because you spend a lot of time knowing yourself, but not paying attention to how others perceive you. The next on the low external self-awareness side are seekers. So seekers have a low internal self-awareness and low external self-awareness. This means that they have a tendency to sort of feel stuck or frustrated with performance in relationships because they're always trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into a place. Now, a person who is a pleaser, they have a low internal self-awareness because they're not doing what's best for them, but a high external self-awareness. So that means that we're choosing actions that are going to be pleasing. We're like hyper vigilant and aware to what others, the feedback that we get from others. And so they find that over time, pleasers tend to make choices that really aren't in service of their own success, fulfillment, or best interest. And then the final quadrant are people who have a high internal self-awareness and a high external self-awareness. So that means that this is where leaders really begin to fully realize true benefits of self-awareness, because you're confident in who you are, but you recognize that you're evolving, and you're seeking out and you're seeking feedback, and you truly value others' opinions. So take a second to think about how you rated yourself, maybe even thinking about how you've changed over time and in different environments. What's your response to seeing this matrix and how you might fall on this? So Kirk adds in a chat, it seems like aware is what we should be all sure it should be what we're all striving for. It should be what we're all striving for sure. But what we also want to think about in this quadrant set here is that we don't want to necessarily overvalue internal versus external. So like one's not necessarily better than the other. That we want to be able and we want to learn how to actively work on both seeing ourselves clearly and getting feedback to understand how others see us. So think about, again, maybe share, y'all, this is a networking event. It only works if y'all talk, because this isn't for me to talk to myself. Think about, maybe share a story of when you maybe had some personal growth in your self-awareness and you've seen yourself move along a continuum of self-awareness. What was a trigger to that? When have you seen yourself make improvements in your self-awareness? What was a trigger?
Hello.
Hi, Tiana.
Hi. So I think this kind of fits. Hopefully I'm in the room of what you're asking us to say, but I know for me, as far as like just how I deal with people, that I don't necessarily do it the same way. I feel like I've grown in that area. Not that I have ever been rude. I just was very to myself. So people perceive that as something else. But one of the most frustrating things I can say for me which is why I became like that to begin with, is when you know who you are, but people tell you that you're not who you are. Mm-hmm. You know, like, oh, you're this way. And I'm like, no, I'm really this. No, you know, it's like when they don't, they see you a different way than who you actually are. That's one of the most frustrating things, which is part of the reason why I just really, at one point in my life, started just staying to myself, because I was frustrated, because I was like, well, I'm really, you know, this type of person, but nobody is seeing that. Why are they not seeing that? So that's just what I wanted to share.
Thanks for sharing that, Tiana. And what you're describing, what I perceive that you're describing, is that just because one sees us as something doesn't mean that's true, right? Like, because everyone has biases, everyone has, you know, their own lived experiences that's influencing how they see others. How others see us is a function of how they see themselves, right? So if you've got people who are really your greatest allies, advocates, and champions, that they may be rooting for your success, but there are certainly other people out there who are not rooting for our success, and that changes how they see this. You know, something, Tiana, I don't know you, but I'm gonna ask, have you ever faced an experience where someone accuses you of being an angry Black woman and fitting that archetype?
Yes.
That's sort of what I thought you were saying.
And not necessarily based on anything I said, just based on what they felt like I was, my appearance, like what I appeared to be.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm not smiling, you know, it was something like, oh, she's not, you know, she's not in a good mood. She's not smiling. She's over there. What do you know, what's wrong? And that's the thing, like, nothing's wrong. Actually, I smile a lot, but sometimes I just don't smile. But I'm not mad. If anybody who really, really knows me knows that I don't really get mad. Like, it takes a whole lot for me to be angry. I'm not just an angry person. So you know, so yeah, I have been put into that typecast before. And I, you know, had to say, well, you know, I'm not like that. Well, that's what it looks like to me. Okay. So then I had to say, how am I appearing to people? Like, what, you know, like, what is my face saying? What is my body language saying to make them put me in that category?
Yeah. So what can happen, and please, anyone chime in here, is like, so this is an ugly stereotype that has been assigned to Black women that is not true. It's based on deep racial and cultural stereotypes and norms. And so what has happened is that when a Black woman just says something, it can be interpreted to align to that stereotype, right? And so as a result, I mean, please tell me your experience. I don't need to tell you what your experience is, but like, I'm guessing that you have to change your behavior to sort of appeal and appease the biases that's being applied to you, right?
Yes, I just feel like I mean, I'm still myself, but I feel like I have to, you know, smile more, or, you know, do things like, even though there's nothing wrong with me. So it actually takes a lot of energy. I'm not even gonna, you know, tell about that. It takes a lot of energy, but because of people's perceptions, unknown biases, and things like you were discussing, you know, when I'm in public, I really try to be aware and be, you know, happy. I'm a happy person, but to make sure that that's showing, so I don't have to, you know, deal with that, because, you know, once again, if you're not smiling, you know, people be like, oh, she's mad, or she's angry, or somebody did something, and I'm really just chilling. I'm just chilling.
Yes. So that's something for those of us who are from more dominant privileged groups to pay attention to, is this hidden labor that has to be done. And it is a performance, and it takes energy, and it takes effort. And we want to make sure that we aren't complicit in creating cultures and environments that make people feel like they have to do that. Loretta, I see that you showed your face in this. Is there something you wanted to add into this?
No, Tiana really pretty much said, she pretty much hit the nail on the head. I am more so, I'm a quiet person. I'm an introvert, and I do more observing before I begin to interact a whole lot. Just because people perceive me wrong at times. And sometimes they don't think I'm very sociable, but it's not that. It's just, I'm just kind of quiet until I get to know you. And then I'm very talkative and you have to tell me to be quiet. So that's just how I am. So I had to kind of look at that, and I had to force myself to be an extrovert in certain places. Like when you said, are you this in one place and that in another place? Yes, I am, because I'm forced to be that way. Like at work, I'm new here, so I'm still learning who everybody is and my role and all of that. But at church, I'm a church leader, so I'm forced to be something different at church because the expectation is much higher there. So yeah, I had to kind of alter myself so that the perception wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like to believe too that in some of that there's some choice, right? Like you choose to take on some of those behaviors, particularly environments that, like your church community, right? Like hopefully you want to be a leader. Hopefully no one's forcing you to be a leader, Loretta. That you choose those behaviors because you think it influences the environment in a certain way. And so you do that as an act of service to that community. So I want to acknowledge Laura's comment in the chat. Lori, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience and what you're thinking on?
Well, what Tiana said really chimed with me, just because, you know, I'm not African American, but I have a disability. And so with that comes people's assumptions. Like I said, like, you know, not so much now, but particularly when I was younger, people, when I was in a store with my parents, for example, or a friend, even in college, this happened to me all the time, people would assume that that person was there as my caretaker or something. And so they wouldn't talk to me, they would talk to them because they assumed that I was also like mentally, you know, not with it or whatever. And so it doesn't happen as much anymore, but that really affected my perception, obviously, both publicly and not, because when I went out in public, I felt like, you know, y'all were saying earlier about the angry thing. I felt like I had to be like the best disabled person, you know, so that I could be like the example of what people should be, kind of thing. I don't do that now, but when I was younger, that was really important to me. And then when I started here, I was super young. I was like in my early 20s. And so I look young now. I don't look like my age at all. And so when I started working here, I looked about 12 years old. And so that was also a problem because I felt like I had to have a different, more mature perspective because I looked so much younger than everybody else. And I was in a wheelchair. So people just perceived weakness, not necessarily intentionally. It's a very subconscious thing, but sometimes people assume weakness when it's not really there.
Yeah. Laura, thanks so much for sharing that. And what each of you are describing is a term we call stereotype threat. And I'm going to turn my camera on for a second, hide my face with this book. But let's see how bad is the swelling. But the book's called Whistling Vivaldi and Other Clues to How Stereotypes Affect Us. I really encourage you to read this book. But stereotype threat and what that is it's risk of confirming a stereotype about you in a space. And usually you have to want to be in that space for you to care. And what happens is it becomes a cognitive load on our brains. And so what you're describing of like having to like, oh, I need to be happy so that it makes everybody comfortable, like that becomes a hidden performance. It's a hidden job. It's an unconscious job that you are doing in any given space. And Laura, it's the same thing that you're talking about, is you're learning how to perform and essentially assimilate into dominant cultures. And the effect of that is it can limit your full bandwidth of capacity to perform and participate in a space. So for those of us who come from dominant spaces, we need to be really thoughtful of that. How are we contributing to environments? Are we making sure that we're helping people to feel psychologically and physiologically safe in a space so that they're not having to have this hidden performance that many times people don't even realize that they're doing, right? Because it's a second nature. It's a survival tactic. It's a way in which you learn to just sort of move through a space. And so even though we're talking about self-awareness here, for a lot of the work that I do around inclusive leadership, inclusive leaders are really attentive to those facts and observations of the people that they work with, right? And they're paying attention to what are the clues that I'm receiving from the people I'm working with to recognize, are they getting to be authentic? In what ways are they having to perform in these spaces? And how can I change the environment and the culture and the climate so to reduce some of that hidden labor? So let's look at some of the next point that she has in the article is that experience and power can hinder self-awareness. And so they found in their work that people do not always learn from experience. Can you believe that? Right? That we can make the same mistake over and over again, and we may not be learning from that. They also found that expertise does not help people root out false information. So what that can mean is that, particularly in the academic sphere, that sometimes people who get so expert in their field that it doesn't necessarily mean that you are the best equipped to root out false information in your space. And this actually goes to cognitive biases and how we interpret information. So we can see information as validating our own. And again, this is just how we make decisions. There's another book, I don't have a hard copy of it, but it's called Nudge. I forget the author, but I'm in the process of listening to it. It's very good. But he talks about cognitive biases, and it's based on another book that, so it actually comes from economics. Anyways, if you want to learn more about that, I recommend looking up Nudge and then seeing the thinking fast to think slow or something like that. And then the third key thing here is that seeing ourselves as highly experienced can keep us from doing our homework, seeking disconfirming evidence, and questioning our assumptions. So again, the key thing here is, just as experience can lead to like a false sense of confidence about our performance, it can also make us overconfident about our level of self-knowledge. And they found that the more power a leader holds, the more likely they are to overestimate their skills and abilities. So they also found in their work that when people who improved their external self-awareness and did so by seeking out feedback from loving critics, those are people who have their best interest in mind and who will tell them the truth. I always remember the saying that we said as kids is like, a friend is someone who will tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not, right? Like that's a loving critic, that they'll give you the truth, even if you don't want to hear it, right? Because they care about you and that they want to risk whatever it might be, your feelings, to help you understand that truth. And so again, we want to seek out feedback. And so think about for a second, who are some of the loving critics in your life? Who are the people that you go to when you know that they'll be a loving critic? Your spouse, your best friend, your partner, your parents, your husband, your children. Yeah, so we've got loving critics that we can seek out. I think I have mentors that have been my mentors for, 18, 20 years. So they are my loving critics that I know that they'll tell me the truth, more so than my family. And so we have to seek out that feedback. So moving to the next and the last bubble around introspection. So introspection doesn't always improve self-awareness. And so one of the things that they found that was most surprising is that people who introspect are less self-aware, and they report worse job satisfaction and well-being. So have you ever had someone tell you to hey, it's good to journal, but don't journal too much, because then you get into a space called what? Rumination. Like if you spend so much time thinking and introspecting, it becomes a rumination, and it can become a challenge for you. And so she says that the problem with introspection isn't that it's ineffective, that most people are doing it incorrectly. And she offers a solution, saying that, we're asking the wrong question, that most people, when we are trying to understand something, we ask why. But she offers to ask what. Now, I like this in some spaces, but sometimes we do need to ask why, because a lot of my other work is doing root cause analysis. And so we do need to ask why. But in this case, she says it's good to ask the question. So instead of trying to understand our emotions of why do I feel like this, or to understand behavior, why did I do this, or understand our attitudes of why do I feel this way, to instead ask what, right? In this case, so what is it about this situation that's leading to this outcome, right? What is it about this employee's action? Was this part of her TED Talk? Well, tell me more. I haven't watched her TED Talk, and I haven't rewatched it recently. So refresh my memory on what you read about, or what you heard.
She talks in the TED Talk about how the question is not why, and she gives several reasons why we should not ask why, how it causes us to focus on the past and gets us stuck. But the question is to answer is what, what can I do going forward? What does this mean for me going forward, and things like that. And so she draws the contrast between asking why and asking what. Mm-hmm. But it was really surprising when she first said in the talk that it was wrong to ask why. And because I thought, well, that kind of seems counterintuitive, but she explained that it was mostly because we don't want to keep ourselves stuck looking backward.
Yeah. So she says to increase productive self-insight and to decrease unproductive rumination, we should ask what, not why. So what questions help us to stay objective, they're future focused, and empowered to act on our new insights. So instead of saying, her example is, why did you say this to me? You can say, well, what are the steps I need to take in the future to do a better job? So then again, when we ask what, not why, that's going to give us nuggets of information to help us improve in those kinds of scenarios. All right, so the last piece here is that she sort of ends with the three takeaways. And so we want to focus on building both internal and external self-awareness. So we need to understand ourselves, and we need to learn how others see us. From an organizational standpoint, if you all do 360 reviews, those are a great chance to increase your true data points of how do my colleagues see me? How do my colleagues like working with me? So you can ask your manager, employer to do one of those. Definitely Google how that should be done, because there's a very specific way it needs to be done. Seek honest feedback from loving critics. So don't go ask for feedback from people who sort of like you. It's not going to be the best feedback, right? We want to get feedback from people who we trust and who are invested in us. And then finally, we want to ask what instead of why. We don't have to end yet, but I do want to make sure, surely you've begun to see the communications leading up to the talk next Friday with Dr. Tasha Eurich, the hybrid leader, how self-awareness drives success in the new world of work. And I understand it's not really a talk, it's more of a sort of panel conversation, panelish fireside chat, which most millennials don't know what that means, but it'll be a great conversation. I've met her. She's really, really remarkable. I've taken a course from her. I was one of her early adopters before she launched it live. And she's actually one of my role models. So I really like her work. I encourage you to listen to her book and learn from it, right? Like, even though many of you rated 6, 7, 8, somebody thinks, 9 self-awareness, like, as we evolve, we need to increase our awareness of ourselves as we evolve. So we're never done. The journey is never over. So I'll go back to this last slide that kind of recaps the takeaways from the conversation, and tell me what's coming up for you in this, as we talked about self-awareness today.
I think for me, just the part about ruminating, I had never heard it put that way before. I'd always kind of thought that, someone that just kind of takes time to journal or write down their thoughts, that could potentially be a productive thing. And not saying that in this instance it isn't, but just thinking about kind of staying there and putting a name on that, I feel uncomfortable in a great way.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. And what I want to add to this, and I don't know so much of this is what she teaches, but we want to, as we increase our self-awareness, it doesn't mean we become those people pleasers, right? It doesn't mean we become so performative in our actions. It would just that we need to learn to see how others see us, because and how that changes how we then interact and engage in that space. It's not a book, it's a philosophy that I love, is just ancient Greek Stoic philosophy. And so we've all heard of, like, Stephen Covey's spheres of influence, of what can I control, what can I influence, what is just a concern. That is actually ancient Greek philosophy. And so sometimes we have to remind ourselves of, like, yeah, I'm aware that this is happening and I can't control it, right? And then you stay steady and keep moving forward. It doesn't mean it needs to throw you off kilter and that you need to have some huge grand reaction in response to something. It's just recognizing this is happening. I'm aware, and okay, I can't control it or influence it. I recommend another book. I didn't queue up any links, but like The Daily Stoic. It's by a modern day Stoic philosopher. He's based here out of Texas. Ryan Halliday, I think is his name. What else is coming up for you?
I actually like the part of asking what instead of why, because I never really thought about it, but I do ask why. And I think that shifting that to asking what is going to be beneficial for me moving forward.
Thanks, Yana.
I think the whole process has helped me more in writing, because I have to work remotely. How my writing is perceived, how what I write is perceived. And I think just like working through this process with Tasha Eurich, coming and working so closely with Kirk on the messaging of it, Kirk has a really fine-tuned awareness of how communication is perceived. And I just really appreciate that, and appreciate it. It's taught me so much it's not that I'm there yet or that I've learned a lot, but it's shown me another facet of how to be aware of how I communicate with people. It's not just the who, what, where, when, how, and why. It's and Kirk's very refined in that. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Allison.
A lot of that comes from trying to figure out how to get students to read what I write. Because they're going to ignore me.